Starting with the two most forgotten cars. This thing, Blubzki, the 1976 Mercedes W115 240D with the 1989 Mercedes SL M117 E55 engine. This car did start life with a 2.4 liter 65 horsepower diesel engine. And now, as I'm sure most of you have seen, and honestly, this car is the reason why a lot of you even follow the Ovalbore channel. There is the shoehorned 5.5 liter all alloy V8 with a Megasquirt EFI system on it that I built, starting in January of 2014, even though this car has been around with us since 2008. This engine makes probably low 300s in the horsepower and probably high 300s in the torque. The car weighs 3,005 pounds wet, and it has a 3.07 to 1 differential in it now with a 1-to-1 fourth gear. The biggest issue I have with this car, used to be cooling, now it's got this 47 Bel Air 3-core radiator, so now that's pretty good. But no, now it's transmissions. It seems to go through a transmission every 120 miles or so. The 540i brake booster setup, the master cylinder and all that's actually up here. So there's no room for it there. And as you can see, I've got a CV boot in there keeping the weather out of the cabin. But this is 2 of the 3 old transmissions. And then it's actually got a combination of 2 of the other transmissions in it now. So it's got the front pumping 3rd gear clutch pack out of one trans and the rest of it's out of the other. Oh man, that's so sad. It's got like mold in it from being so wet down here. It's really, really icky. I'm just gonna put the window down. Crank windows, man, underrated. This car is very, very comfortable. It's very spacious, even though it's a mid-size. It's actually reasonably clean, even though, you know, I've done some body work like filling in the antenna hole. And this car originally had the big bumpers and the side markers, so I've blended all that in. But it has SLK 55 AMG mufflers on the back, and it just is the meanest sounding thing ever. It has a 15-gallon fuel cell. It's got a Bosch 044 fuel pump. And yeah, I'll again make this an excuse to cold start it. The shifter is actually, this is a W202 C-Class knob welded to the W126 carrier, and then it actually has detents, but those are an aluminum plate that I actually cut by hand with an angle grinder and put underneath the boot. So it's a factory W115 shift boot, and it just kind of, it looks kind of like a stick, but anyway, we couldn't find a good solution for this. Originally it was a 4-speed car, now it's an auto, which pains me, but nobody ever made a manual for this M117 engine. Speedometer, it's got a speed hut, I think 4.5-inch GPS speedo in it, which works really, really well. It's got an aftermarket tach where the clock used to be. The oil pressure gauge sort of works. It's a VDO electric unit. Originally this car had a mechanical oil pressure gauge, so it actually had an oil line coming from the engine all the way to the gauge. Currently it does not have an alternator belt on it, so that's not going to work. The fuel gauge does work, but empty really means about half full. Full does mean full. Temperature gauge works. The orange switch is the fog lights. Red is the fan. Leave the lights on just for sake of here. Here's the first gear solenoid for the transmission. So if you bang this thing down into second and then smack the switch while you're stopped, you're in first. And then when you hit about 6,000 revs in first, you smack the switch off and it just bangs second gear. And then you can manually ratchet through third and fourth with the shifter. But as you can see, it's done a whopping 807 miles since the engine swap. And yeah, this is the 4th transmission. So not super great. And originally it had an ignition key, and then right here there was actually a pull dial for the glow plugs and the starter. So we just added a tiny start button. And that is the sound of a bad transmission in there. Sometimes it won't catch idle on its own right away. I guess I gotta pedal it a little bit, but you can see the oil pressure gauge. So it almost runs like it's carbureted, but it is indeed injected, but it just runs pig rich, and I don't think the timing's all that great either. So I don't know, it's just a whole heap of fun. It sounds absolutely stunning when you're banging this thing off the rev limiter and all that, but it doesn't get driven because it keeps blowing up transmissions. So yeah, that in a nutshell is Blubzki. As far as what the future holds for this car, another automatic transmission until I can find a machinist that's willing to take my spare engine and a spare transmission, which isn't here anymore, and make them play nice together so I can get a manual back in it. Otherwise, I may consider putting in a Mercedes M113 V8, a little bit later one, and then dealing with that in respect to putting the Chrysler Crossfire transmission on it, which is available, cheap, made by ZF, and 6 speeds. So there's this car. It will get more attention in the future, but wow, that's what we call a low priority for sure. There's Blubzki.